Thanks for joining us. It's quite a dramatic entrance. It did like a countdown and then a video, and yeah, so we're launched. It's happening. So we'll just introduce ourselves and then we'll introduce the session. So my name's Christina. I'm Exec Director of an organisation called Strike a Light in Gloucester. I'm a white woman in my late 30s with blonde hair, and I've got a blue background behind me, and my pronouns are she and her. So Strike a Light, we work in Gloucester with Gloucester people, communities in Gloucester, artists, and we tend to work in non-art spaces, non-theatre venues. And I'm going to hand over to Philippa.
Hello everyone, my name is Philippa Smith and I'm a community producer in Gloucester, and I work with Christina. I'm a Black woman and my pronoun is she or her, and I'm wearing a grey top and I have a very light background, lots of light shining in, it seems. And I'm going to hand over back to Andrew.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Andrew. I work as a freelance facilitator and maker creative, and also an engagement manager at Manchester International Festival. And I'm sitting in my lounge room. I've got facial hair and this kind of mustardy type jumper on. I'm a white man. I've got a couple of nose piercings, and I'm wearing a headset. Makes me look like a telemarketer, I think. And yeah, it's pronouns, he, him, they, them, she, her, whatever. I don't mind any pronouns. That's fine with me. And I'm going to hand to my friend Shada.
Hi, my name's Shada. I'm trying to think of what I am actually. I actually work with Andrew as a volunteer really over at MIF. And I've started recently also as a community kitchen manager at my local community centre, where I will be hopefully in the future creating a lot of co-creation with the local community. I am an Asian woman, almost 50, even though you don't look it, no. I've got a kind of like teepee background, and my pronouns are she and her, and I am wearing a nice flowery top. That's me.
Brilliant, thank you. So today's session is about co-creating cultural programmes. So we've kind of talked a lot over the week about co-creation in general and big concepts and co-creation of projects. But what we're chatting about in this session is what happens if you're trying to co-create a whole programme for an organisation, and how do projects fit into that? And also, what does that mean for the organisation, and how does that affect how the organisation works? And when Andrew and I first spoke about this workshop, we got really kind of deep and meaningful into this, and like, is it even possible if you co-create within an organisation, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to look at a bit of that, but also trying to share some really kind of practical examples of what a co-created programme might look like, what's worked, what hasn't, that kind of thing. So we're going to share some stuff from Strike a Light, and then Andrew and Shada are going to share some stuff, and then we've got some prompts and provocations and kind of a bit of an opportunity to reflect. I found it really useful this week, just hearing from loads of different organisations and projects and people about what they're doing, and it just kind of triggers things in your brain to be like, oh, I wonder what would happen if we did this, or thought about it like they were thinking about it. So we're hoping that this session will do that for you. It would be brilliant if people were happy just to pop in the chat as we're talking, just to kind of introduce yourselves, and if you want to, just kind of your name and whether you're here as an artist or freelancer, or you're here on behalf of an organisation. And then the other thing to say is that we will do like a kind of proper Q&A session at the end, but if you've got questions throughout, if you can pop them in, there should be like a Q&A button that's next to the chat. Then it's just easier for us to pick out that there's that there's questions there. But yeah, if people are happy just to pop into the chat to introduce themselves, that'd be brilliant. And if anyone else wants to introduce anything else in this session, Andrew or Philip or Shada, go for it.
I was just going to say, we were originally like talking about how we make this like really interactive and do like this real like co-creation together and like share our experiences, but also learn from the people in the room. And obviously this format is somewhat limited, so please really do activate that chat and rhyme off the things we're saying or disagree. I think, it is that sense of a conversation that we want to create as much as possible. And towards the end, we're going to run through just some questions and things that I guess that we've been considering and thinking about in framing or shaping a program. So you might want to do that with pen and paper, or you're all sitting in front of a computer, so you can type it or whatever. But we'll try and have a moment for you all to reflect from your own perspectives and your own practice. So if anybody wants to share that towards the end as well, we'd love to invite some different perspectives as well. I think that's it. So back to you, Christine.
Well, let's go for it. Okay, so as I said, Andrew and I were kind of asking the big existential questions about, is it even possible to co-create if you're in an organisation, and organisations and the arts industry are built on power imbalances? So I know Andrew's going to chat a bit more about that later. So with the Strike a Light stuff, what me and Philip are going to focus on is how we as an organisation are kind of adjusting ways that we work so that that co-creative programme can be at the heart of what we're doing, and how using co-creation originally in projects is then kind of shifting and changing how we operate as an organisation, so that our main programme now is a co-created programme. And I'm also a very big fan of like practical application of stuff. So we're going to put in as many examples as we can of, this is the kind of concept and the theory, but this is what actually happened when we did it, or this is how we did it, and kind of sharing what worked and what doesn't with that. So if people are talking about co-creation or participation or public engagement or whatever it is, however it's kind of phrased, it's all about that relationship between people, communities, artists, and usually arts organisations. And the differences in that relationship in those different kind of setups then tends to rely a lot on some pretty basic questions. So who's creating the art, who's making decisions about the art, and who is it for? So for Strike a Light, our kind of key thing with co-creation is to try and focus on that idea in the name about how we create with people and create something together. So we're looking at everything we do as an organisation, from recruitment and how we involve communities and artists in recruitment and create processes together, through to, as I said, through to programming and the programme itself being co-created. So it's us as a staff team, communities in Gloucester, and then artists both locally and nationally working together, sharing ideas, making those decisions. And me and Philippa were, when we were kind of plotting this session, have boiled it down to like 4 things that we're going to kind of share on this. So one of them is about shared decision making, about avoiding predetermined outcomes, about changing the project timeline, and about flexible ways of working. So we're going to chat through those 4 things and what that looks like for Strike a Light. So kicking off with shared decision making. Strike a Light works in a city that doesn't have any year-round programming for theatre or dance outside of what we do, and there's not a kind of professional programming theatre, receiving theatre, anything like that. So that means we've always worked in community spaces, putting on shows in community centres, car park rooftop, empty shops, schools, stuff like that. And originally that was out of necessity, but also we soon noticed how that shifted the relationship with audiences, and how important the venue choice was. And we did a lot of work kind of matching venues and audiences and shows together, and then starting thinking about that in terms of a relationship. So I'm just going to share a couple of images that hopefully these will come up, that Tolly, who is an artist who works locally, she creates GIFs. So we've got GIF versions of these, but I'm afraid in the PDF you'll just have to imagine them moving and appearing. But this first one was just kind of helping us visualize how that kind of more traditional relationship works. So you have kind of artists way over here creating stuff, and then they come to organizations and they say, please, will you program this? And it is usually that dynamic in terms of who's holding that power. And then organizations decide if they're going to program something. And then there's megaphones in there, because then very often it feels like kind of shouting out into the void of like, come and see this thing and you'll honestly like it. And it's a kind of transactional relationship between the organizations and the artists, and between the organizations and audiences. So what we're trying to shift that to is that it starts with a conversation, and that everyone is in that same space together, artists, organizations, and audiences or communities, making those decisions together and deciding how it's going to work. So by using different venues, like literally physically going to where people were, kind of meeting them in their space, straight away we noticed that kind of shift in the dynamic. And you know, it's not a new idea going to people rather than expecting them to come to you, but we could just really clearly see straight away the difference that makes to the relationship with people and the dynamic. So then that began a shift across all of our way of working about how can we meet people where they are and begin those conversations, and share that decision making from the beginning. And I have an analogy for this that I like to use, which is sandwiches. So obviously there's a well-known sandwich shop there. Other sandwich shops are available. I'm just going to close that down. Actually, you'll know now what a sandwich looks like. So if you go to Subway, theoretically, you have lots of choice. Like it's your sandwich, you're choosing the fillings, you're in charge. But actually, when you go into a Subway, you're choosing within a structure that has already been created. So they've decided what the bread choices are. They've decided what the fillings are, what times they're open, how much it's going to cost, all of those kind of things. So you're choosing within a structure that someone else has created. So if you wanted a bagel or a wrap, tough. You might have an amazing bread recipe that you could share, but Subway don't have a way for you to share that. You might not even like sandwiches. You might have an idea for a sandwich that no one's ever eaten before. So Subway is like an efficient, structured way of making sandwiches and giving people some decision making. But it's not going to be the most exciting sandwich of your life. And that decision making isn't truly shared. And imagine if you were involved in like all stages of that sandwich, like working with like bakers and growing stuff and sharing family recipes and creating like the sandwich of your dreams. So that's obviously a slightly excessive analogy, but that's the shift that we're trying to create at Strike a Light, and it is a process, but just really trying to work out what are the structures that we're putting in there that are restricting decision making within a framework we've decided, and how can we shift that so we're making decisions together. So pre-COVID, we were still working in the structure of touring shows. And 2020 allowed us to see how far we could push that idea of shared decision making. So our autumn 2020 programme called Gloucester Presents was entirely co-created. And at the beginning, we had no idea what it was going to be. So we teamed up with community producers and artists and Gloucester residents and basically said, what do you want to do? And there were lots of conversations. And then we ended up with things that we've never done before, that we would never have normally programmed. So we had a community chat show. There was a textiles and poetry project. There was drop-in beatbox workshops, a community song, a fashion show. The budget was a fixed parameter in that for obvious reasons. But aside from that, everything in it was kind of up for grabs. And it definitely felt like a different way of working. And one of the things we've been asked to do in these sessions is kind of be transparent about what works and what doesn't. So just on a personal level, that's like deconstructing like nearly 20 years of arts project management. Like you need to know things, you work to criteria, you plan stuff, you have really detailed schedules, and you do all of that as early as possible. And so for me, that's a very different shift in ways of thinking. and having to just let go of stuff and see what happens. And the more that we've done that, the more weird it is. Like it's now genuinely odd that people who cultural programs are for have no say in what they are or how they work. And just the more we do this, the weirder that gets. And it's definitely a journey that we're still on, and we reevaluate it all the time. So our focus at the moment is, how do we sustain that freedom that we had during COVID, in that there wasn't those structures of touring, but at the same time support artists who want to be touring stuff and want to be making shows. How do we put those things back together? But the co-created program now is our program. So that basis for it is that shared decision making. And I'm going to hand over to Philippa to chat about the idea of no predetermined outcomes.
Thank you, Christina. I just love your analogy of the sandwich. It makes me smile every time. So as Christina mentioned, I'm going to be talking about having no predetermined outcomes when co-creating. So I'm going to be looking at the ways that we used to work and the way that we work now, and then why we shifted from working from one way to another, and the pros and cons of doing so, because as mentioned before, it's really important that we're honest about what works and what didn't work. So our initial way of working, my initial role was probably best described as audience development, but specifically targeting the Black community. So we'd have pre-programmed work that was chosen by the artistic director, and she would choose a handful of shows that she thought really would resonate with the Black community. I'd then be given a small list of shows, maybe, or sometimes just one at a time, and asked to promote it among the Black community. I'd gather some promotional material and spend some time going up and down the high street targeting the Black business owners. And I chose this particular street because it was a street where I knew that the Black community frequented, and it had a number of hairdressers and barbers and Black-owned shops, and it had a real buzz to it. So I'd go in, I'd talk to the business owners and their customers, and basically just try to sell the show to each person. But to be honest, it was a little bit of a lonely job. But then I was fortunate enough to have a colleague who said that she would join me. She was basically organizing the Black History Month program each year. And so that was much better. After the first event, we offered complimentary tickets. We went back to the owners and we just basically offered them complimentary tickets for the next events. And also we thanked them for allowing us to advertise with them, because they allowed us to put our posters, etc., in their windows, their shop windows. We also gave them Christmas cards for them and their families. And we also went back and fed back to them about how the shows went. So if they didn't manage to come, we tell them exactly how the shows went. And they were really touched by the gesture of it all. So what didn't work so well? Well, no, maybe I'll start with why this worked well. It worked well because we were able to build trust to begin with. We were able to build a positive relationship with the business owners, and they started to look forward to our visits as well. And they started attending the shows, because prior to this, we struggled to get the Black community to attend the shows in large numbers, but they actually started to attend, and they started to help us to promote the shows as well, not just by putting it in their windows, but sometimes they would allow us to leave a handful of flyers by the side of the tills, etc., and they would hand them out. And it really began to gather momentum. But in terms of what didn't go so well, basically, I quickly discovered that it wasn't necessarily sustainable pounding the streets before each and every show, especially as we had started to have more and more shows. And also not seeing or knowing enough about the show sometimes to really sell it. So it wasn't necessarily a show that I'd chosen. I'd just be told, this is the show, and I hadn't seen it. And it was sometimes really difficult. And then there were times where maybe I didn't have the affinity with the show either, but it was, as I said, it was tricky. But then also trying to sell something that sometimes you know that they might not enjoy. So for example, there was a contemporary dance show that I was trying to sell. Now, without sort of drawing stereotypes, traditionally, many of the Black community may not necessarily want to go and watch a contemporary dance show. That's not everyone, just as a whole. So I was trying to sell a contemporary dance show, and I was asked questions like, will I enjoy it? And I was like, it's something new, you know, you should try it out. You know, I'm sure you haven't maybe seen this before, etc. So it was really hard, and I didn't want to break the trust by, you know, not being truthful. I wanted to keep that trust, but at the same time, I really wanted them to come. So that was a challenge. And then also sometimes sort of inviting the wrong audience to the show. So for example, I targeted some church goers once, went to the local churches and spoke to a number of the elders that were there and invited them to one of the shows. And they all came out in their numbers, and it was wonderful. And I did do my due diligence. I did ask what the show was about, etc. And I was told, but when we got there, it was slightly more different to what we had been told. And some of them basically stated that they felt it was a little bit X-rated for them, which was hilarious at the time. But well, not at the time, but looking back now, we can laugh about it. So there's some challenges there. So I knew that there needed to be a change, and so we, you know, we did do as much as we could to change that, and we decided on a different way of working. So during the initial phase, it became apparent that as I went around, people were really enthused about the work that was beginning to happen in the area. And some of them stated that they'd love to come on board. And as a result, we formed a small group of community promoters. So this was to basically take the pressure off me. So it wasn't just myself or my colleague who then said she wasn't able to come anymore with me to promote, but by having a team, we then had a number of community promoters. But their job extended further than just community promoters. They wanted to actually, they showed interest in actually helping to program the work that they wanted to see in the city rather than just promote it, which was a real shift for us. And so the pros, I'd say, for the change was that everyone then took ownership of what was being shown. The promotion of the events became much, much easier. If I was able to reach 100 people, with all of us, we could reach 1,000, for example. And because of the group, it represented quite a large age range as well. So we had all sorts. We had like a young person, we had someone who was retired. So we were really rest assured that it really reflected what the community wanted, because they also knew lots of people in the community and they'd feedback. They became the eyes and ears. And we built long-term relationships with the community promoters as well. So whether or not they were involved in the shows, they still really wanted to help. And to be fair, when I was thinking of the cons, there wasn't a huge amount for working in this way. One of them, which isn't really a con, it's a nice problem to have, was that the community promoters wanted to work on every single project, no matter how big or small it was. So that's a really lovely problem to have. And then the other thing which was said, and I've taken quite seriously, was that members of the community had concerns about the rights and ownership of their work and their ideas. So they asked questions like, how do we protect the rights of the creators? And they had concerns that they might lose intellectual property, but that's something that will be discussed as we continue. So why is it important to shift from the first way of working, where we went around just asking people to advertise, to the way that we work now? Well, our community has a say in what it wants to see and experience. It has a sense of ownership as well. So for example, we've just done a large Windrush show, and we had a small time frame to turn everything around. We had a band well, we wanted to have a band, and we couldn't find one in a short space of time. And one of the promoters said, my brother's in a band, I'll ask him. And so he was able to then come and be part of the band. And then when I spoke to the band member, I said to him, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get a Caribbean feel for the event. And he said, oh, are you going to then get some palm trees or something? And I said, you know what, that's exactly what I was thinking. We'd love to have some, but there's no way I'm going to get palm trees at this short notice. And he goes, leave it with me. And he went and he had a contact at one of the large department stores, and he called me back and he said, I've got a load of palm trees. And basically the department store had just given us for free all their palm trees that was in the window X display in their windows, and they had given it to us. So that was really fantastic. So yeah, I mean, finally, you know, if you create a sustainable way of working, continually creating new experiences which reflect the ideas of the collective or community, it just results in a huge melting pot of artistic goodness. Thank you.
There's a question in the chat about were the community promoters paid? I don't know if you want to just pick that up.
Oh, yes. So yes, we did pay our community promoters, and we felt really strongly about that because it was a matter of not just, for example, one person being paid who, for example, I work for Strike a Light. We didn't feel it would be fair for me to be paid, but them not to be paid. So everyone was paid.
Well, thanks. So our other two things are timeline and flexible ways of working. So I'm just going to chat quickly about timeline. So all of those things about shared decision making and not having predetermined outcomes require a different timeline. And that's on two levels: the timeline for the events themselves and also for the programme as a whole. So just as a really quick illustration of that, this is kind of like from the beginning again, isn't it? So if, for example, you're going through the stages of project planning, so starting the project, setting the budget, choosing the art form or the creative idea, deciding outcomes, identifying partners, creative team, producing team, deciding on the location, very often in a kind of traditional setup, then engaging people is then like the thing that happens on the end. But with that timeline in that order and that engagement at the end, or what, you know, whatever form that takes, conversation, co-creating, if that's at the end, then that means all of that decision making has happened beforehand. So in terms of the timeline for events, we've just tried to flip that round. So the kind of first stage is talking to people, communities, identifying artists they want to work with, vice versa, having those conversations. So the timeline then for that is shifted. So it then allows that opening up of that decision making is then very much determined by that timeline structure. A lot of our co-created events are also happening over different kinds of timelines to the ones we normally work in. So sometimes they're much shorter. It's like the miracle that Philippa pulled off with the Windrush event. And we had some stuff where COVID regulations changed, and, you know, within a day's notice, people had like flipped around how it was going to work and made it happen in a way that just isn't normally possible in a standard organization. And it, it's allowed us to be a bit more responsive. It means our timeline as a whole, as an organization, is completely different, and we are definitely still working that out. So at the moment, we don't know anything that is happening in 2022, and usually we're working about 6 months ahead. So again, that's quite a scary position in some ways to be in, and it does present some challenges in terms of budgeting, in terms of how you communicate to funders and planning timelines. We're about to put in our next MPO application, and we have to put in an activity plan for 23-24. We don't even know what's happening in 22 yet. So that's all stuff that we're still negotiating how that works, but we're holding on to that thing of changing the timeline to allow the shared decision making. And I'm going to hand back to Philippa to chat about our last one, which is flexible ways of working.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly talk to you about why flexibility is important. So we found that being flexible flexible ways of working sends a message that you are important to the participants. We've also found that being flexible has allowed different people to work in really new and innovative ways, and it provides a freshness as well, which just helps to keep things evolving. And also maintains interest. So, but to be flexible, you need to understand the community and the people that you're working with. You can't sort of work effectively with the community if you don't understand them. I like to say that a lack of understanding leads to misunderstanding. So it also leads to sort of barriers and walls going up as well. So it's important to have someone in your group that acts as a bridge. And so if you have the bigger the project as well, the more bridges you need. So what do I mean by a bridge? Well, we all know what a traditional bridge is. You know, something carrying a structure across so that you can cross a road or a path or an obstacle. Well, in our practice, we have created bridges, and we've created them to sort of blend unusual circumstances or combinations of work. So by that, I'll give an example. Our Windrush project was a combination of elders telling their stories about their experience of Windrush via interview, and eventually a film was made. And then the overall performance showed the film of the elders, but it had 2 spoken word artists who responded and reacted to the interviews. So it was a mixture of recorded and live performance. But from my experience of working with elders, I knew that it would be difficult for them, or to get them to agree and be comfortable working directly with the spoken word artists. So myself and my colleague Michelle acted as a bridge. So Michelle, she's lived all her life in the community. She knows the elders, worked at the day centre, had a great rapport with them. So Michelle and I decided that we'd interview the elders together, and she was there to make sure that they were comfortable, pampered, and we decided that we wanted to treat them like VIPs, which made the interview process much easier. So Michelle was that bridge between the elders and the project. And then my role as a bridge was between the artists and the project because of my artistic background. But bridges can be made between any potential obstacle. So bridges for us have been really, really important. And then, you know, what flexible ways of working can be established from understanding the community? Well, when you understand the community, you're more likely to take into consideration the way that they work. For example, like I talked about earlier, stereotypes, so we should be careful not to make stereotypes, but at the same time, you can't ignore certain cultures or traditions. So for example, you may have a group of people who are traditionally late, but not everyone in that group is going to be late. So how do you cater for that? Well, we do this by carefully considering our event formats. So we're careful not to be too prescriptive on our flyers, for example. So our Windrush, I'll use the Windrush because I've talked about that a lot. So that was our last production. Our Windrush production was planned for 6:30 till 8:30. And the idea was that the doors would open at 6:30 and the audience came in, and then they'd grab a plate and head for something to eat. The show would then start at 7:30, and it was an hour show, so it would finish about 8:30. However, we had hired some Caribbean caterers, and the caterers were late. And so we had to be flexible. So we encouraged people to grab a drink at the bar, and we had a band, as you know, so the band was playing and people were mingling as they drank, and then everyone was seated, and then we started the show a little bit earlier. We started at 7 o'clock instead. So when the show started, they watched it for an hour, which took them to 7:30. By this time, while the show was going on, we got the caterers. By then, they'd come to put all the food in individual boxes. And when we'd finished, they were able to take their box and they could either sit at the table and eat, or they took it home with them, and no one was the wiser. So it was all about being really flexible. So we need to be flexible in so many ways, not just the events, but also communicating as well. So asking the participants and the co-creators, like, what's their preferred way of communication. So for us, we found that everyone wanted to use WhatsApp. So we send emails, we might not get immediate responses, but with WhatsApp, we started creating lots of different groups and subgroups, and everyone could work together. And meeting times as well. So lots of the co-creators, they work in the day, or they have childcare to think about. So we would have meetings at 8 o'clock at night, which isn't necessarily conventional, but that worked for us. So we were flexible with that. And then also, like, the venues, we used to meet in a coffee shop. Everyone enjoyed that. And we went to a local Starbucks and we'd sit and eat and plan. And it was really good fun and helped with our creativity. And also for our show, we had live streamers as well. So when we asked initially about live streaming, we quoted thousands of pounds, but we had some funerals locally, and we knew of a contact who basically, this live streamer was doing all the funerals, and we asked him, and he quoted us a couple £100 because he doesn't usually do theatre and shows. So if you're flexible in approaching your suppliers, you'd be surprised how you can get things and do things that you wouldn't usually be able to do. Our shows were totally sold out, our last show as well, hence why we had to have the live streamer. And that's one of the reasons, because we know that the audience we're inviting, for example, we had a lot of Caribbeans come in and they love to eat, and food is a really important part of the culture. And so we put food as a part of the program. And when we put that on the flyers, within 2 days, everything was sold out. And we had waiting lists, and hence we had to live stream. So it all has a knock-on effect, but flexibility is important. So just to conclude, the main takeaway I'd say is co-creating by nature calls for flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we should have, there's a little video of the fashion show that Philippa produced that I don't think anyone in the world could have produced but Philippa. It was a mammoth project. And if it's possible to play that video, please, Jason or Claudia, that'd be lush. Thank you.
So we've got like 3 main parts to the show. The first part is the Windrush, the second part is COVID, the third part is Black Lives Matter. And we wanted to do those 3 parts because we wanted to look at our past, our present and our future.
We felt that in terms of Black Lives Matter and COVID, it was something that was happening. And then with the Windrush, it's because there is a big Afro-Caribbean presence within Gloucester.
With COVID, the colours were red, yellow, mottled colours. Windrush was coming from the Caribbean after the Second World War, and those colours represented the army. Black Lives Matter, because it was a cultural issue, I felt that black and white was really strong.
I wanted to add an infusion of colour to the models that would complement the outfits that they were wearing by the designer.
Everyone has taught me about coordination, has taught me about how to keep a stance and how to present myself and how to keep a professional manner within the places that I'm working on. And it's not just having fun, it's about making sure that everything is up to a standard where people can enjoy and see that we're all professionals in here.
The community spirit here, people are so nice here. They really are. They're genuine, they speak to you, they're open. I love the people of Gloucester. It really is nice. I like the fact that they have risen to the challenge.
The subject matter to me was already kind of being worked on almost subconsciously, big topics that I was going to address at some point, and I wanted the opportunity to address through writing.
Just being in sync with music is very good, because rhythmically, music is a part of us, but it's amazing how disconnected we are from rhythm sometimes.
It's taught me to just express yourself more.
I'm inspired with the hospitality of the people in Gloucester, the multicultural and those people that live in Gloucester. It inspired me that I feel the little time I stay here, I want to be part of the community, and then I want to contribute my quota and giving back with the little time I have.
Brill, shall we hand over to you, Andrew?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a really beautiful video. I've got little goosebumps. Before I start, I just want to pay my respects to the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations as the custodians of the land in which I was born and raised, and recognise that these lands in which I was born and raised are of contemporary importance and traditional importance to First Nations people as a place for ceremony, celebration, initiation and renewal. And in doing so, I recognise that sovereignty was never ceded, and giving this acknowledgement outside of Australia, in the UK, I recognise the role of the British in the dispossession and genocide of First Nations people. I really loved hearing both Christina and Philippa talk about all the different practices and processes that they've been involved in. And I think this is a topic that, I'll be really honest with you, is like a constant tension that I'm grappling with in all these different projects. And today I kind of want to focus on a few different case studies, but really bring up some of those tensions and make them really visible. So in doing so, these are my meanderings. This is not me representing Manchester International Festival, any other organizations. This is my self-reflections. This is my reflexivity in my own practice within the context of institutions. So bear with me, and also please engage in the chat with anything that kind of resonates with your own work, or questions that maybe you've been asking. And yeah, let's go. So I'm going to speak on a couple of different examples, and they speak, I think, to language. They speak to timelines and some of those parameters and the tensions around that. And I'm going to speak about these in relation to Manchester International Festival, People's History Museum, and a company that I worked for, got a lot of respect for in Australia, called All the Queen's Men. And I want to assume that we've kind of got a shared understanding at this point of co-creation, and that what instead I'm going to speak to is more some of the tensions and definitions. And I'm really pleased to be joined with Shada, who has been in some of these examples with me in different settings. So I'm going to throw to Shada at some point to kind of reflect on some of the things that I'm saying, but also some of the conversations that we've been having. I think the tension that I want to really highlight at the start is that sometimes I think big organizations forget that equality around arts participation and arts democracy and all these kind of stuff has been built on the back of mavericks, the misfits, the agitators who really believed and fought for the right for people to take up space. They made room for people to take up space and not only share the tools of cultural production, but also allow people to really run with it, and to profile the things that they think are really important. And often these are now the same organizations that are co-opting those practices, sometimes without the shared philosophies, and not necessarily the skill or the know-how, and not even a nod to those in the grassroots sector, those that have been doing this for years, and not even kind of referencing those pioneers, kind of using co-creation as it's this new thing, and we know it's not a new thing, that people have been doing this for a really long time. And I think in holding this tension at the very start, the organizations moving in this space are then also sucking up the resource and the funding that would often have gone to these more grassroots organizations. I think this is a tension that I hold and that I kind of recognize, and understanding the importance of language and shifting, I guess, from this learning and participation model that some of these big organizations have embedded in their practice for a long time, and understanding that participation is not co-creation, and just reshaping or rehashing a participation or learning program as co-creation is not it. And I think this is a tension that we need to call out and find ways of not necessarily doing it antagonistically, but being really aware of language and the importance of language and what we actually mean when we start diving into this pool. And I think these tensions were really illustrated in a conference that was ACE organised called Uncommon Ground at the Lowry in Manchester in 2018. And essentially it was all about how we work with communities, and it was weighted towards the larger organizations, but there was so many people in that room that this was their bread and butter. This is what they've been doing for so long, tirelessly, often at the smell of an oily rag, and with a real sense of agency embedded in their projects, kind of being presented to like, well, this is how you do it, and not actually understanding the space that these organizations are starting to take up. And it blew up on the day, and there was this huge discussion around kind of pseudo co-creation and agency and what have you. I'm going to give a very little abridged version of where I got to and the space that I kind of play in, because I think, yeah, it speaks to some of the tensions or some of the questions I have. So I basically failed high school. I was told that I wasn't really going to get into university or anything. And I kind of was, rebelled against that and did a theatre and performing arts course, and was really interested in why are people in this course not representative of some of the people that I knew. And was very, it was a very monocultural group of people that all had a wealth and privilege. Not all, but, there was a commonality. I was really interested in agency and how actually we could make art with communities, but actually based on sharing resource as opposed to like, hey, come along, and that participation model. And I started doing that for a few years, and then I decided, probably as a bit of an FU to the careers advisor that told me I wouldn't get into university, I went and did a PhD, and that was set in a sex research centre, the Australian Research Centre in Sex, Health and Society. My PhD was about male dancers, but I kind of positioned it somewhere else, unconventional or, whatever, all those tropes that I have. But this was a research centre that was set up in response or out of the AIDS epidemic. So it was set up in the early 90s. And so from a very outset, it was a research centre that had real world impact for people in community. So there's a really strong translation between research needing to be relevant to the communities most affected. So the hepatitis C program, the HIV programs, stuff around LGBT visibility and anti-bullying stuff in schools, that actually every single project was built with stakeholders. It wasn't necessarily like all co-creation or co-design or anything, but actually it was very strongly embedded in the research, making sure that it would make a real world impact to those people's lives, not just kind of your textbook, there's the academic reference, but making sure that the resources really spoke to what people needed and doing that in partnership. And I think taking that experience, I kind of moved back into the art space and found that a lot of this work wasn't done with the same authenticity as it was in this research setting, which was really quite odd in some respects, and a little bit surprising, I think, maybe just changing that frame of reference, seeing things afresh. And yeah, that's something I guess I hold in some of these tensions. I'm going to speak of a couple of examples, and the first one I wanted to focus on out of that is the Coming Back Out Ball and the sister project, the LGBTI Elders Dance Club. These are some of the most beautiful projects I've worked on, and they were created by All the Queen's Men and artistic director Tristan Meacham and Beck Reed. And basically the project was one where the art was very political and transformative, and it was based on research that LGBTI people of an older generation were being forced to go back into the closet to access aged care facilities or to access services, that they've had these social networks that were really important to them, and then all of a sudden being in spaces that were not necessarily safe for them. And they're also a group that often didn't have big, strong family networks. When you're thinking about the male generation, a lot of trauma from a lost generation of people through the 80s and 90s and the AIDS, HIV epidemic. So it's kind of it's a very important group of people, and one that has often been left behind. So the project was designed around creating some sort of event for these people that addressed their mental health needs, it created visibility, but was really centered also on celebrating this community. And so the project was built very much in consultation and collaboration with a certain group of people that acted as like the champions for the project. So the project really drew upon ball culture and party as a site that was quite central to this community. So every aspect of the event was kind of created in consultation. And I'm using the word consultation here, not co-creation. We never use co-creation. But for example, we knew that the event was going to finish late at night, and getting home safely in darkness was something that wasn't appropriate for people. The start time, all these kind of things. So not just the artistic programming, but thinking about all the different aspects that people could inform. So the first event was held in Victoria's largest civic space. It was the Melbourne Town Hall, and it was a free event for elders 65 plus. They had a 3-course meal, drinks, and versions of this event were repeated in 2019, 2020, and in 2021 with National Theatre of Scotland and Luminate Festival. And it's kind of taken outside of the context of Melbourne and been remade with different communities. I won't go into the complexity and nuance of this event, but I think what I wanted to highlight is that this was an event that was transformative, that had real social value, had multiple partners across all sectors of society outside of the art space. We never discussed it as co-created, despite the fact that the large majority of the event was actually created with the communities. And I think this is the bit that, in terms of language, is quite important. It didn't feel like we needed to call it anything or brand it as anything for any funding bodies. We could talk about the project, how the project was established, without delving into definitions of language or trying to co-opt terms to make them fit the context in which we're working. So I think that's just one that I wanted to talk about. We recognized that the intervention was very much artist-led. And that was one of the strengths of the project, because we were able to navigate the politics of the LGBT sphere, which is particularly specific in that age group, and work with different funding bodies and different networks without all that baggage that might have come from it. So I think that's an interesting one, thinking about the co-creation and the context in which we're making stuff. We were really thinking in that project, how can we transform every element of the project, not just the artistic? So the communication, the marketing, the engagement, how we're reaching communities that might not otherwise be connected. How do we build that with people? You know, the people that we're working with are the ones that had all the answers, or everything was kind of thought about in that sense. Before I move on from that example, I'll just give a couple of like personal snippets that just like is the transformative bit for me. One moment where there's a 70-year-old trans woman who attended the ball by herself 6 weeks post-op as her debut. A lesbian standing this close to me who gave me so much grief in the lead up to the event, with tears streaming down her face, saying it was the most beautiful night of her life and the first time she'd been recognized as a lesbian and as an elder. And then a moment where I spent 2 hours on the phone with a man who'd been living with HIV for 30 years. He was blind and he'd lost connection with so much of his community, and attending the ball kind of allowed him to reconnect with and re-establish a social life. So there's all these like really transformative moments, and every single one of them actually had an element of co-creation to it on a minute level. And I won't get into that now, but I want to move on to another project, and this one I'll do in far more in much briefer as a point of reference. And this was definitely tagged with the language of co-creation. So it's a project at the People's History Museum, which is a museum based in Manchester. And I'll speak briefly around the context and the way it worked. So I think this one is interesting in its simplicity. This is quite a large organization, and this is something I feel that somebody and other organizations could quite easily replicate and adapt for their own purposes. So it was in the context of the Peterloo exhibition, which recognized a big massacre of people that happened in Manchester for people that were fighting for the right to vote, working class people, you know, real northern, fighting for rights, basically. And the museum was really keen to work with young people to explore different contexts around protests using creative approaches. And so they partnered with 3 different organizations that work with young people. So there's 42nd Street, which is a young people's mental health first aid charity, a PRU, so a pupil referral unit, and Reclaim, which is a group that works with working class young people. They assembled this group of young people who helped put in the parameters around an ask for artists. So it's an expression of interest. We want somebody to work with us. It was a really simple expression of interest. And then they gave artists 100 quid if they got through to the next stage to write up a more detailed proposal that was then presented to the young people in a panel kind of setting. So they shortlisted 5 and then you were invited to pitch. And the project that I worked on, I actually pitched to the young people, and they selected me. So it's not just a great process because I was selected, but I think what was really great about this process is that the young people were, in terms of the development, really thinking about, well, what kind of thing we might be asking the artists to do, doing that in partnership with the museum, who had the expertise around, okay, this is how you might write a brief, selecting the artist and then working with them on a co-created project. So I think that's just a model of something it's quite formulaic, and it's something I just think it's easy to replicate. I'm now going to move on, and I'll introduce Shada to talk to some of these experiences a bit, to talk about Manchester International Festival. And I'm going to focus less on specific projects and instead talk about the broader aims of the organisation and speak with honesty again around some of the tensions in thinking about co-creation at scale, with full awareness of the benefits and a full awareness of the intention behind why the organisation wants to work in this way. So just a bit of context, the Manchester International Festival, for people that don't know, is a biennial festival in Manchester. All the work is brand new, so it's premieres. So every work is made here first in Manchester, and then much of it tours around the world. There's been a huge shift in the organisation over the last few years, really embedding much more community agency and stuff at the heart of the organisation. Historically, it's been very much that, let's get some participants who will work with this artist on a choral piece or whatever those different projects might be. It's been a big shift. We're opening a massive building called the Factory in 23. This is one of those buildings that is part of the Northern Powerhouse. It was a whole lot of money, new money that came into Manchester to build a space that is like no other. It's a versatile space. It will go from like 5,000 kind of standing room gig kind of venue to theatre spaces. It can all be divided up. So it's a multi-purpose kind of warehouse space. And there's a real desire at the heart of that to embed much more citizen-led kind of agency and co-creation. You can look up the Factory, you can look up MIF and that kind of stuff on the website. And I think there are quite an amazing range of things that have worked to start embedding community agency. And I'll go through to Shada in a second, who's been involved in some of them. And then I'm going to speak to a broader program that we're not thinking about, that we are doing, that is going to open the Factory and speak through some of those tensions that we're working out and thinking about, that include timelines, no predetermined outcomes, and all this kind of stuff. The building is going to open on a certain date. It is a significant, significant investment. So, you know, there are some tensions here from what Christina and Philippa was saying that we're working in, and a nuance. So I'm going to throw to Shada, who's been involved in our People's Forum, which is a consultative group of people that meet once a month. We've got a Young People's Forum, and both of these forums speak to the board. There's two forum representatives on the board who are official trustees of the organisation's board, and Shada's also been in a number of other projects, both at MIF and others in other places. And I'll throw to you, Shada, and then I'll pick up on some of the questions around looking forward to tomorrow and those kind of things.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for that introduction. Hi, everybody. It's the first time I've done anything actually like this, so do bear with me. So I'll just give you a little introduction about myself then. So I've been, I actually went to university a very, 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 very long time ago, 25 years plus, but I did theatre studies there because I was really interested in the theatre, really interested in reading books and everything like that. Didn't enjoy it, didn't find that it was actually for me, mainly because I would say that it was very archaic in its teaching, maybe that it was just because of the times. So really I fell out of love with theatre really for a very, very long time. And then in 2007, Manchester International Festival came along and I worked there in the box office through Ticketmaster. And what I saw there was something, like Andrew mentioned, where there were brand new productions in venues that were very different as well, you know, very unconventional venues. And I just thought, God, I really, really love this. So when the festival came back again, I decided to volunteer. So I've been volunteering with them since then. I also have in the past been a participant in quite a lot of their events. But what I've really been doing on the co-creation part was two things really. First thing was talking points. This was I was approached by the International Festival to take part in a talking discussion group in Harper Hay in Manchester, where I live. This was part of their creative engagement program to actually get more audiences from other parts of Manchester, which traditionally were not coming to the MIF events, you know. So we started off meeting together, and what really struck me was how the simple way of talking together actually made the communities actually themselves feel as part of an artist program. And what they also did was that the International Festival also took people to events as well. And so then the actual accessibility to events also then made more of these, more of the communities actually come to their events and made them actually more accessible to all, And then we went on to do Looking Forward to Tomorrow, which Andrew is actually going to be talking about just later. That event, which we did for the actual festival last year, was the biggest co-creation event that I'd actually been part of. And like Andrew said, actually, like what both the previous speakers have said, we started right from the beginning. So we had people from all different ages, from all different occupations as well, people that have got interest in the theatre, people that haven't got interest in the arts, to come together to actually create something for the festival. And we were part of the process right from the beginning as well. And also what we did is, the thing that made me actually more part of it is that we were actually the artists. So we were always told, and we always had that support of actually being the artist as well. So we weren't just brought in as a consultation and then the festival would go and do something. We were always consulted from every single part. That would be from the backstage people, from executive producers, right through to sustainability, right through to the sustainability manager, so that we looked at all actual aspects of the event. So when it came to the actual event itself, we also actually participated on it as well. But the main thing is that it's the fact that we created something that was like a blueprint that hopefully then other organizations or even, the International Festival in the future can actually use, And I've taken that blueprint myself actually and used that in my future work that I'm doing in the community kitchen as well. And I've also actually, when we were talking about timelines earlier, the process for Looking Forward to Tomorrow was one that went over a year to a year and a half almost in person, but mostly actually online because of COVID. But I also took part in a creative project with the SICK Festival, which are based up in Manchester. They actually have got a 10-year contract with the NHS, so one of the biggest organisations ever we have here, to actually create creative workshops for people that have accessed mental health services in Manchester and Moston in particular. Because Harpurhey and Moston has got the largest referrals for mental health, I think, in the country. And so what they have created and what I took part in is like a 6-week program. So it's quite a short program where we just met once a week. We took walks and we took pictures. And then what we did after the 6 weeks is that we selected our 6 best pictures, wrote a few words to just to describe them. And now they've been put in an exhibition. So that was something that was done over 6 weeks as well. So I've experienced the short and the long, when it actually comes out. And I actually got the same experience, and I actually got the same satisfaction from actually both as well. What else have I'm trying to see what else I've actually done, but those were the main things that I just wanted to actually touch on. But another thing actually is the factory assembly. That's right. So Andrew was just telling us about the factory assembly. So yeah, the factory is a massive building that's going to be built in Manchester. And I've been part of the co-creation group to create the welcoming for the factory, which is going to be events over I think a 4-week to a 6-week period between January and March when it first opens. So the assembly is made up of mainly people that have actually participated in previous MIF events, And they come again from a very, very diverse range in the community and from all different boroughs of Greater Manchester, because it was very important that we do represent all of Manchester, because it's extremely big. And we have started that process actually now. I think we're actually maybe 3 or 4 months actually into it, and the event won't be till 2023. So we are taking part in every aspect of it, and we've been consulted as well as our ideas incorporated. And the main thing that we've been, the main part of our scope is always to think big. And I think if we give people in the community that sense of that they can think big, and these things can actually happen, then their creativeness actually comes out more. And one of the things that the International Festival do really, really well, I believe, when it comes to the co-creation part, is actually having that support and making sure that that support is always there in many, many, many forms. And also take away some of the jargon that actually goes with creating art, maybe, I mean, I do actually come, like I said, I did do an arts degree, and sometimes even mine shy away maybe sometimes from things when when the jargon gets a bit too much. So, and that's one thing the International Festival do, they kind of demystify co-creation, so it does make it more accessible for everybody, from the young to the old, and especially for people with differing abilities as well, and that's something that, in my experience with the International Festival and with SICK Festival, they've always actually addressed and always been upfront actually about. And so overall, my experience actually with co-creating has always been a very, very positive one. However, there have been a few times that I have walked away actually from projects, or the experience hasn't been beneficial. Those experiences really go around the sustainability and making sure that the support is actually there and not feeling as though you've been used. There has been a few times that I felt like, okay, you brought me in, these are my wonderful ideas, you've created this, we put it on, and then see you later, because when, if I can say, when ordinary members of the community do actually take part in these events, especially when they've been in them for a long time, a year, up to a year, they put their heart and soul into it. They really do. And they really do also maybe show a part, of them that they don't show to others. And so I think that should always be nurtured. And I think that big organizations, especially when they are using co-creation, should always be aware of that and always, ensure that you do have that support system and you do keep it actually up and it is sustainable.
Thank you,
That's everything to say, actually, if that's all right. None of that was written down, as you can tell.
Thank you so much. I think that tension around, how we look after people in processes and projects is really important, and I think underpins some of the things that I grapple with in a large organization where actually the building is going to open at a certain point and the organization is known for creating really big work, and you only open a building once. And so there's a lot of tensions around that, getting it right, and need internally to support people to understand the process, to trust the process, and to trust the people within it. And it's fair to say that if you haven't worked in that way before, that's a big organizational shift. How you talk about it from a comms and marketing perspective, how do you actually explain that ambiguity held by theatre makers or dancers or choreographers starting a new process or project is fine, because there is a sense of trust that they know what they're doing. And it's how do you hold that same ambiguity with a group of people that represent a cross-section of the community. So the factory welcome, I won't go into too much depth. This is a big project with that ambition and aim of co-creating and we are using the terminology co-creating. It's in all the funding bids. Co-creating or co-commissioning an opening season to a new building. And I just want to speak, just to end, aware of time as well, of just some of the grapplings and questions around this process and project. We are at, we're at the midway point. It opens in 2023. So, things are starting to ramp up. I don't have the answers, but these are some of the grapplings that I think are useful for perhaps other people that might be thinking about how they embed modes of working that are co-creative in a large organization and in an organization that is maybe being led in a really different way. So historically, MIF has very much been artist-led. So, you bring together world-class artists, you put them in a room and you let them do their thing. And what they do is that. So how do you do that? Same thing with the same ambition and the same scale needed to activate a building with communities whose starting point might be a bit different. So these are just some of my ponderings, and they are my own reflections. So what definitions are we using when we're talking about co-creations? Are the definitions adequate for what we're trying to do, or are there better terms that are more akin to what we're trying to do? When do you pay people? With such a significant investment around the outcome, when do you pay people? For example, in the Factory Welcome, there's a whole range of people that are giving a whole lot of time and energy, and at what point and when do you pay them? My answer's already there, but how do you support an organization to hold that ambiguity that is embedded in co-creation when you don't actually know what you're gonna do or gonna create? So working on those timelines. Who are the people in the organization that are going to need the most reassuring? How do you communicate the differences in timelines and outcomes and process that allows things to develop, but also meets those clear milestones that are important for other team members? So that might be like, venues, or it might be ticketing, or how do you meet their needs within that and communicate like you would as a good producer? How do you communicate the project as it develops? When you're asking community members about artists or ideas, how do you support that with a frame of reference without dictating or reducing one's contributions? So how do you support people to think big, which I'm doing in this case, but also at the same time not saying, well, that artist isn't appropriate. It's like, how do you support ambition and scale? How do you support, I think a big one for me is the telling of the story. Co-creation is so important in the process. How do you make some of that process visible? How do you share that process, bring people into that story? How do you do that with a marketing and comms perspective? I think as large organizations are taking kind of this shining to a socially engaged practice, particularly co-creation, for all the reasons that it's great, how do you hold that complexity and nuance and that self-reflexivity? Because I think it could be argued that many organizations are doing this as a clear box ticking exercise because it appeals to funders who obviously are now prioritizing social impact alongside other more creative objectives. So I think that for me is that hopefully that nuance and also those tensions that I've made really visible, because I think we do hold that ambiguity, and I think it's important that we don't, we're honest about that. And the language and making sure that what we're doing is not just like a neoliberal box ticking exercise, like, yes, co-creation done, tick. Like, how do we hold those things that Christina and Philippa are able to really probably more genuinely do in their processes in a different milieu, a different like environment and context. So that's all of my pontificating. Maybe we were going to do a little screen break, but instead of doing that, maybe I just encourage everybody to do like a little bit wherever you are. It's so weird. I'm used to doing this on Zoom so you can see people. but you don't have to do this, or no one's seeing you. So maybe just like a little stretch, do whatever you need to do to make yourself comfortable. I know it's a long time sitting, hearing people talk at you. So yeah, if you want to make a brew now, no one's going to know. Do whatever you need to do. That's really fine. We had some questions. Christina and I were kind of talking about like how do we had some really great in-depth conversations that unpacked so much of this nuance, and it was really thinking about, well, what are some of these questions? I've presented some to you already, but what are some of these questions that we feel are really important in starting a project? And Christina will share a link. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So there's a link there in the chat that should just open as a PDF. If for any reason it's not opening for you, then you can always drop me your email and I can email it across to you, but I'm hoping that will open.
And in doing so, this is the bit where we would have gone, okay, and everyone in your breakout room, discuss some of these things and come back and share. So obviously this is a solo exercise. Rebecca, I love that you're being horizontal. This is a solo exercise, and you can use it around an existing project, something that you've been thinking about. It can be really specific to the context in which you're working at the moment. And we'll give you a bit of time to think about those things.
Should we do like, where are we now? 15 minutes or something?
Yeah, we'll do 15 minutes, and that gives us plenty of time for questions. Or 10 minutes, and then you can finish it off in your own time.
Cool. So that's starting again at 25-2-ish, or just before?
Yeah, 25-2-ish. Do a little like
high level of precision. 25-2-ish, officially on the dot.
Yeah, timeline. What's timelines and schedules? A bit flexible.
Flexible.
Building some flexibility.
Yeah, and if there's stuff on there you want to ask about, or pop stuff in the chat or in the Q&A, then go for it. There you go. Claudia's keeping us to time. 13:35.
Love that. So the exercises are very much around kind of values and principles. So, the first one is really thinking about, why is co-creation important for the project? Who is creating the art? Who is making the decisions? Who's holding the power, and who's it for? So thanks for joining us doing that little exercise, and big shout out to Christina that came up with many of those prompts and questions. I don't know if you want to speak to any of that, Christina.
I suppose just to say that they're all ones that have come about because we've done them when we've been trying to work out what we're doing, and that we've, I think, 3 or 4 times even over this year have done a lot of that, like just literally starting again with how are we doing it and who's talking to who and who's in the room and all of that kind of stuff. So they're absolutely not presented as, we've worked these out, now you can try. It's like this is an ongoing process, and hopefully that reflection is useful in the stuff that's part of your ongoing process as well. But yeah, if there's things that people kind of thought about or realized or discovered or prompted questions doing that, if you want to put stuff in the chat, then go for it. That would be brilliant. And equally, if you've got questions on anything that we've talked about that you want to put in the Q&A, then go for it too.
Christina, I've got a question for you.
Oh, blimey. Okay.
So with these, I don't have easy answers for a lot of these. I think it's obviously so messy, and you speaking about like going back and like looking at them again. Yeah, do you arrive at things that stick for longer than like 6 months, or does it change again the answers to some of them?
It's more like trying to refine stuff. So I think the thing that makes it easier for us is we are a smaller organization. So there's only 6 of us who, like, we're all part-time, and there's only 6 of us who are regularly in the office. So in terms of like literally sitting down and having a conversation and going, maybe we should change this, maybe we should change this, that's quite easy to do. But I think I always focus on like big structural stuff, like leadership structures need to change. The way that decision making works in organizations needs to change. Otherwise, the co-created bit of stuff is always like, oh, that's the education department over there, or the outreach department, or whatever. And even that idea of outreach is like, you are here and you're reaching out to people and trying to get them to come into you. Yeah, so I'm quite big on like literally just what's it called? I read it in one of those creative people and places things, dispersed leadership. And like there's a thing about adhocracies, which is another phrase that I quite liked, where people are like coming together to make something happen, and that structure works for that thing, but you're not trying to make everything work within a structure that's been there for like a bajillion years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, because you can't share agency with people if you don't also have agency in some of the big structures. And sometimes it's like, if you've got 95 different channels to get something signed off on, yet you're the one holding the relationship with somebody that's quite personal. You know, you've got to be more reactive to the things that are coming up, and be able to be authentic actually in that conversation, and not just holding everybody in that like, well, that's a really good idea. How about I get back to you in 6 months' time?
Yeah.
See if we can fund it.
Yeah, and that's what, again, it is an easier situation to do it from in an organization like ours, because we haven't existed for, you know, we're less than 10 years old, and we don't have a venue and stuff like that. So then when Philippa says, actually, we need to do this differently, it's a lot easier to be like, okay, great, let's do that.
Yeah, I think that's what I've had to learn, is like not to be too purist about some of this stuff, and let some things go, and then pick the things that are really important, and what is the core. And some of those questions are really useful to think about, like, actually what are the core principles that are not up for debate, or not up for challenge. Because I think Shada was right when you were saying, Shada, you know, like in some projects, you know, if you're treated like shit at the end of it, then it's not really it's not great. You know, that's one of the core.
Well, just going from, it's just interesting hearing you as practitioners and me as, you know, the person that's participating, or the actual co-creator. My actual question would be like, why? I know that's such a big question, right? But why are large organizations now really looking so much into co-creation? What is their end game from that? I know it seems such a big question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know? But it's because it seems to be something that, from what I can see, that a lot of organizations are taking on a lot. And is it to reach diverse communities that you couldn't reach before, and to make that actual bridge? Is it that what it is? But my main thing is then keeping that bridge going. Do you know what I mean? Making sure that it is sustainable, because I have been part of projects where I have thought that I was a bit of a tick box exercise, you know, where I was asked certain questions, maybe rather than, you know, maybe kind of being consulted, rather than actually being part of that whole creative process. So I think it is very important if you know, companies, whether art companies, whether actually any other sort of companies do take part in any sort of co-creation, that they do, that they are very, you know, transparent in what their aims are right from the beginning, you know, and in their leadership structures also as well, you know, because that way then you do build that trust with the audience, and then it goes back to actually the co-creators that you do take part in those communities, the way to get to them is the old school way of word of mouth. And, you know, and if a person has had a good experience with an agency, then they will encourage other people within their community to actually engage. And that would be with the arts as well as any other sort of organisation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, like, you're absolutely right that lots of organisations are focusing on it more. And Inez has said in the chat about having to be honest about why people are doing it. Obviously, you know, cynically, it is going to be for some organisations, and it is going to be because that's where a lot of the funders are shifting their focus, and you're having to demonstrate how you're engaging people. I think for some people it is like I don't know, I get really like soapboxy about it. Like, it's public money or it's charitable money. So it comes from everybody in this country, therefore should be for everybody in this country. And I would still believe that if I was working in a big organization. So I think there are absolutely people working in big organizations who truly, you know, have those kind of same values. Oh yeah, Claudia's just given an example of another funding part that's about that collaboration. But also, even if even if I was running a big organization and I was like power grabbing, cynical, evil person, then not that people running big organizations are those things, but even if I was that, in terms of like, you know, building audiences, like everything Philip has done is sold out. Like, even if you were being really cynical about it, from an organization perspective, making sure that audiences are engaging with stuff rather than like one person in marketing like desperately sending stuff out trying to find people, it makes sense from that perspective as well.
I think there's a thing around the funding that's really, really big, you know, where funders are looking and how you have to prove value. I think what I've learned more over the last probably 5 years is the different pulls and tugs in a large organization. And I didn't actually ever think I would be working with large organizations, really honestly, for a whole range of reasons. And it's like, actually, organizations are pulled in all different directions for so many different things. And using the factory as an example, you know, that is a big statement for the city, from the city of Manchester. So that's one massive stakeholder. You've got residents that are then another massive stakeholder. You've got philanthropic and like sponsorship aspects, which is another like big thing, and the partners. And so there's all these like, I guess, not necessarily competing. It shouldn't be competing, but there are, the organization is constantly being pushed in all these different directions. And it's how you bring in all those aspects of the business to understand the methodologies around co-creation and how it could enhance what they're doing. So, you know, for example, with the factory, how can the food and beverage offer be enhanced by co-creating that with communities? And how, you know, how do you embed it across a whole range of things, not just in the creative output around audience development? And I think that's the big one. Chasing KPIs, yeah.
And as I said in the chat about that, the art still needs to be part of it. And yeah, like artists as part of that conversation and as those creators. We did quite a lot of stuff where we were starting to do all these different types of events that we'd never done before. And then we kind of got to think about what makes it a strike a light thing. And we are an arts organization. So for us, you know, the incredible way that artists think and see the world, like that adds value to any project. So artists as co-creators in that, and that creativity being really valuable.
Anybody else want to make a statement or ask a question? I think it's really lovely. Like, I don't think any of us suggesting we're the experts in this either, so it'd be really great if other people have got things to add as well, or sharing of experience.
Yeah, I think we've got to the same point as you, Inez. at one point I was like, let's not do shows anymore. Let's just do co-created projects. And like, but actually it's all like seeing stuff that you didn't even know existed, like, and would just like never have come up with in your brain. Yeah, there's such a place for that, and how that shifts people and their perceptions. And
I think Darren Pritchard in the conference, I think it must have been Tuesday, was talking about, you know, like freelancers are, you know, are historically co-creators in the sense that they work with all sorts of different people to pay the rent, all that kind of stuff. He was far more articulate than me, so it's really bad paraphrasing. But essentially, you know, artists' approaches are often co-created. It's just the framing of this is also often around a different collaborator being the community and being kind of this elusive like community, whereas actually most projects are co-created to some definition. So it's like, how do you bring the community into those approaches? I think, yeah, that wasn't very nuanced. Apologies, but yeah. Jason's saying that you can replay Darren's thing. So yes, go to that one. Amazing creative and community organizer and leader, and yeah.
Oh, and Halima, who is another community producer in Gloucester, who created one of the projects I was talking about in Gloucester Presents, and has gone on to create loads of other stuff, is doing an event tomorrow as well about how that process has worked, and engaging different communities through that. Just as a little plug for Halima and her event.
I'm aware of the time, and if people don't have other questions, we don't have to like hold you here for us just to like rhyme and like fill in space. But yeah, if people have got questions, shout them now. And I wonder if Philip or Shada, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I'd like to just add that from a personal perspective, I think that co-creation definitely is the way to go, and I think it is actually creating artists as well, and it's also, like you said, it's probably giving established artists also a different perspective as well. So, I mean, would co-creation go into maybe actually collaboration then, you know? So, so whereas both the artist and the ordinary person feel more equal, as well. So, I mean, I kind of feel that as well, as I've done more and more, that I do feel myself more of an artist as well. But I also hope then that one other thing is that we have plenty of resources then for these people, so going forward, people that do want to be part of co-creation groups can then actually share that knowledge as well, and to make sure that organizations do keep that momentum going, really. I'd hate to see co-creation just be a flash in the pan somewhere and then another method comes along and then, just used and abused. Don't want to be used and abused, in that way. But thank you for asking me to take part in this. It's been a really, really interesting conversation.
Thanks for being a part of it.
Yeah, I think for me also, just like Shada, co-creating is definitely the way to go. And I'd hate to see it sort of just be a flash in the pan thing as well. And I think from my experience, just having or just creating things that we would probably never have thought of, when you've got a real melting pot of ideas and different people's views and cultures and age ranges and all sorts coming together, you create something that's so unique, something that you probably, like I said, you probably just wouldn't have sat down one person or even two and thought that, yeah, let's do this. So for me, I just really hope that co-creating continues. And there's so many people who haven't had the opportunity to experience it as well. So I'm hoping that in time, it's one of those things, isn't it, where you invite people to try it and to come in. And I think that's really important. It's about us being almost like ambassadors of co-creation and inviting everyone on board and saying, look, everyone's welcome, come in, because everyone has something to bring to the whole thing. So yeah, I just hope that it continues.
It's a really nice thing to end on, maybe, but
Yeah.
if no one else has anything to say or any questions.
We let people go about their day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, and also like you guys doing this session with you. It's been lush. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you
been
all.
fantastic.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.